As we start off here on the chapter on matching shots in action, where we're applying all the techniques we've been learning up to this point and applying it to this music video, just some quick notes for those of you who have access to the exercise files and are following along. What I've done here is I've reset everything back to where we were at the end of the previous in action chapter on base grades. So throughout chapters 9, 10, 11, what I've been doing is using these various shots as examples. I fixed some problems in here. None of these fixes are here. We're starting where we left off, but I will solve some other problems, and then we'll come back later in this chapter and take a look at my final sequence and some of the things that I did. But what I want to do now in this movie is start out and talk about, well, yeah, it's time to match our shots. We've done our base grade on all of these shots. They're generally in relatively good shape, but there's still some problems I want to solve. And before I start matching shots, I do want to solve some problems that I find distracting. And in particular, I'm thinking the sign up here with the yellow. I'm also thinking about like this big red orange thing, this sticker that's back here. If I come into shot number 8 here, that red is really in danger of getting a little oversaturated. I'm going to want to take a look at that. And these two problems are really a variation on a theme. What I'm going to do is Option S, and let's Option F as well so that we get into this enhanced viewer. And I want to pull up my scopes, and I've got the vector scope set up here, and that's really what I'm looking at right now because I'm concerned about saturation. I'm concerned about this oversaturated sticker. I'm concerned about the saturation of the yellows here. And the first glance at the vector scope doesn't seem to show me that anything is wrong. Let me pull up the options, and for some reason this has been reset really low, and as I pull it back up, you can see how I'm literally clipping detail out here. This yellow is so powerful that it's literally off the charts. I don't want that to happen. What I want to do is grab those pixels and desaturate them down to a more reasonable level because what happens is, number one, when something gets oversaturated like this, you lose detail in that object. It becomes overwhelmed with color and you lose visual detail, visual acuity, and it tends to look very, very artificial. It tends to look very unnatural. So I'm going to pull this back in, and there are a couple ways we can do it. Of course, we could sample the color, but what I like to do is look for any oversaturated pixel anywhere in the color wheel and then automatically suck them back in. So let's add a new node, and this node is going to look for any pixels that are overly saturated, and then it's going to desaturate them automatically for me. And how am I going to do that? Well, what I'm going to do is come down here into the qualifier. I'm going to Shift H to turn on my highlight mode, and now I'm going to leave everything at its default except for saturation. And what I want is to lift up the low and start excluding every pixel in this image except the ones that are really oversaturated, right about there. If I move my scopes and take a look at what's happening on the viewer, look at that. It's selecting any pixel in this picture that's, this range of saturation here. And I'm going to put a little bit of softness on here so it's not quite as hard-edged. And maybe drop it down just a touch. If I go too far, now I'm starting to pick up pixels that really aren't overly saturated, so I've gone too far. So I'll continue to exclude right about to there. And now let's go ahead and I'm going to watch my scope as I dial back my saturation to right about there. Shift H. Now I'll Shift F so you can see the full screen view, hide the scopes, and now Command D to turn the node on and off. And you can see we've backed off those yellows, but really it's almost unnoticeable unless you look at the scopes, in which case it's a huge fix. Now, this fix alone is enough to keep you from being bounced if you're going to, let's say, a broadcaster. You send them a signal that looks like that, and your program's going to be rejected. You send them a signal that looks like that, your program's going to be accepted. But even if you're, let's say, going for the web, right? A signal that looks like this is well within bounds of established norms. If you start delivering signals that look like that, who knows what it's going to look like on the final end. After you compress it, then YouTube compresses it, then it goes down into Chrome, and then they do whatever color management they have on that particular browser, and who knows what your final results are going to be. Better to deliver something like that that's well within range and very manageable. The cool thing is, I've done this in a procedural manner. In other words, any pixel anywhere on this vector scope that is this amount of saturated is going to be picked up by this particular qualifier. What am I talking about? Right down here, this saturation, it's not being limited by any particular hue or any particular brightness. Any pixels at this level of saturation or more saturated are by definition going to be out here. If I activate this node and Shift H, that's the pixels we're talking about. These are oversaturated. Turn off the highlight mode, and that's what we're bringing them back to. Now what I like to do then is, this is such a useful node, it ends up being saved as a power grade. So what I'm going to do is version this out. Version 3, okay. Got version 3 loaded up. I'm going to delete node number 1. And once again, it's not working right now because we're no longer feeding it oversaturated values. That's okay, because it's only looking for oversaturated values. Now I'm going to go ahead, save this off using my shortcut, and rename, change the label, and call this desaturate illegal. Now, whenever I need a node that does this, I don't have to come back here and start from scratch, and we'll flip ourselves back to the space grade initial. Now, let's come into shot number 8 down here. Now, I'm not necessarily seeing anything illegal here. Let's go ahead and kick up our vector scope and make sure. Nope, not at all. So I'm going to keep an eye on this red. Doesn't look like it'll be a problem, but then again, I might decide it's a distraction and do the same type of thing. Key out the red, desaturate the red if it becomes a distraction. But here in these alternate angles, I may have problems with some oversaturated colors. All right, so I can continue now on with my shot matching, feeling really good that I've got all my technical problems out of the way, and now really this is just a function of creating good looking images that match each other.